time kills all deals. And the longer you wait, the more there's a chance of something going wrong with a big time customer and you losing that huge revenue that you were using to base the amount of your raise.
Hey, I'm here today with Lindsey Mignano from SSM Legal, who's one of the rockstar lawyers here in San Francisco. I've just had the pleasure of actually being in New York for Tech Week with Lindsey and hearing her share some amazing insights around early stage startup funding and everything to do with helping really early stage founders get their business up and going and navigate through everything to do with startup equity. So I wanted to take some time to connect and get you to actually share some of those insights, and then also spend a little bit of time talking about both the funding environment, but also how founders early on in their journey think about the whole team equity incentive side as well.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsey Mignano. I'm one of the co-founding partners of SSM. It is a women-owned corporate law firm primarily serving early stage companies. So I think seed through Series D, that's a kind of our sweet spot. We have a number of different attorneys, but most of our staff is based here in San Francisco, with the others based in Seattle, Los Angeles, and San Diego. The bread and butter of the firm has always been venture capital for early stage companies. So happy to be here today, and thanks for having me.
We're in an interesting pivotal time at the moment, and I wanted to open up with maybe a little bit of the perspective around what's going on in the funding environment at the moment in the US, and then also how that relates to some of that relates to fund flows into AI, which is a hot topic at the moment. But just in general, how does that impact early stage founders? How do they start thinking about going to the market in the current environment?
Yeah. Absolutely. So what we tell all of our clients, and we tell a lot of our referral partners too, is like one of the things I think our team is very good at is we always track market stats. Yes. From various third-party sources, because we want to make sure that when we lawyer things, we know what negotiating leverage we have in light of the current market. So right now, anecdotally and statistically, we are having an economy of have and have-nots.
Yep.
So there's been a lot more later stage deployment. So think Series B and C plus, and quite a bit deployed. But when you actually dig down deep into like the 121 billion that went out this past quarter 1, 2025, which is the most recent quarter that we have data on, like 1/3 of it went to OpenAI.
Yeah.
So when you actually break down the numbers, you're seeing maybe 7 companies take some really big numbers home, and they're always at the later stage, and never at the early stage. And you're seeing this vibe in the room is like, well, where is this money going? And it's not necessarily going to early stage. Early stage is down at the seed level 12. I think it's 12%. At the Series A, it's 6.7 or something like that. So 12 and 6, it is not insignificant to feel that as well anecdotally. And I will say, in terms of location in the US, Silicon Valley still happens to be where it's at.
Yes.
And last quarter, there were 504 deals and about 60 billion deployed, about 58.7. So, close to 60% went to early stage. It feels really good for early stage. Yeah. In other markets, you're going to see a steep decline. New York and Massachusetts will always be like 2 and 3 usually. And we're seeing New York come in with 305 deals, as well as 3.8 billion deployed at about 60%, 63% to early stage as well. Yeah. So again, you're still seeing some early stage companies make money in this economy. I do think that it is, it can feel like, where is the money? Because of the fact that the people who are getting the money are very specific types of founders. 24 to 30% of early stage financing dollars went to AI companies. So you're going to see a lot of AI B2B, B2B to C, PaaS or SaaS that are going to raise very easily. Not as easily as in 2021, but still quite easily. And then of course the strong suits are going to come out, like the founders who are repeat founders, who have formed and sold companies before, are going to do well in this economy. Founders with really strong ARR, I would say 500 to $1 million when our founders are raising a Series seed of, let's say, 3+ is a really nice sweet spot. 2 to 4. Some people will say 1 to 4, but anecdotally, I'll say like 2 to 3, maybe 2 to 4 if you're raising a 10 million plus Series A.
Yep.
And really having that books on the books and records of the company is proving successful for the founders who are raising. Our founders who are having more difficulty are the founders who don't really have sticky customer contracts. So like their betas didn't convert into paid subscriptions, or you're seeing a lot of drop off. There's not that much revenue, and they are being asked to show some revenue by even, seed stage investors, which is in a good economy never heard of, but in this economy, something that comes up more often on panels and anecdotally in asks. And that is making a difference in terms of who is getting the funding. So it's not certainly an economy where it feels robust, even though the numbers seem to indicate that there's a lot of venture dollars being deployed there.
Yeah. So overall numbers look pretty good. When you dig below, particularly if you're not a sort of AI first, startup, then the amount of capital that's being allocated to that sector is lower at the moment. And then if you're a first-time founder, it may be a little bit more challenging. Any tips for people who might be in those buckets? How do I think about it if I'm a first-time founder?
Even for our clients who are not AI companies, and they obviously are feeling it a little bit more than the AI companies on our docket. And they are being asked to show ARR, right? So the business person in me would say, concentrate on that sales deck more than that pitch deck, right? Really make sure that the sales deck is rock solid. So when you go to your potential customers, you're able to really understand and get to their needs and then get their feedback, and so that you can develop and pivot as need be, so that we can get those beta trials and make them actually paid subscriptions. Because if you are a SaaS or a PaaS in this economy, you are likely going to be asked, what's your revenue? And if you have no revenue, it's somewhat of a non-starter. You might get a VC who says, oh, you're too early for me, even though that VC notoriously funds pre-seed and seed. So in the past, our clients would be like, why is he, even asking for that? And we've been like, well, it's not 2021. So now people are being asked to show something, some sort of traction. And I think ARR is the most easy question to answer, how sticky is your product? How much do customers like your product? Are they willing to pay for it? And get out of this beta trial or trial subscription mode for 90 days. And I think that is the point where we see VCs get really much more interested in our clients, even the ones who are not AI, is when they have customers that really like their products, that are willing to pay beyond a free trial, and that are willing to serve as references or hopefully evangelists of the product.
Great.
And I do think founders, aside from understanding what VCs might ask for, should take the time to understand what the VC market is as well, right? VCs have to go to LPs and raise money. There's been 12 exits, IPOs in the quarter 1, 2025. It's been pretty much nothing significant since the heyday of IPOs and SPACs back in when the funding was great in 2021. And so, if VCs don't have big exits, they can't return their monies to LPs, which makes it harder for them to raise more funds. And it makes it harder for them to justify deployment, generally. They have to be choosing the best and the brightest, right? So they're going to be much more careful. They're going to sit on their hands a little bit. They're going to take their time. Their due diligence is going to be much more robust. And that's because of the external pressures that they're facing. So if you are a startup founder and you're really savvy about the market, you don't only understand the market as vis-a-vis it relates to you getting money, but you have to understand the market as the vis-a-vis how your funders get their money. Who pays them? How do they make their money? If they're not having IPOs, how do they get that 3 to 5x back to their LPs, right? And if they can't show that, then what? What does that mean for how they do their job and how they move in the world? And I think understanding the psychology of that from a holistic perspective is the best thing a founder can do, especially in the fundraising environment. And my founders who do that the best, who really take the time to understand the dynamics in the market, not affecting only their personal interests, but the interests of their VCs, are the kinds of founders that really do well in terms of pitching to VCs.
As the startup's kicking off and they're starting to look at, maybe their first funding round, part of what they're doing as they actually go on that journey is they're building a team, right? Maybe a couple of co-founders early on, but they're building a team from early on. How do most of them think about, running their first funding round versus getting the team members in and building that team? How's that sort of play out? We know that safe notes dominate really that first funding round at the moment. I'd love you to dig into a little bit more about, some of the advice that you're giving your founders around, what they need to know about those funding instruments, and then how they actually progress through that, and then how they start thinking about those as they get onto price rounds.
Right, totally. And I can address both scaling and funding because they kind of do come together. You can't really scale if you don't have the money, right? So Generally speaking, when founders form, and there's tons of great online options for this, and a lot of our founders will have already used those online options. They might be a team of 2 or 3. They haven't paid themselves a dime.
Yep.
And in California, for those of you who are not in California, wage and hour law still applies from an employment law perspective, regardless of whether you have money in the bank, right? So, there's always a risk, a co-founder risk there.
Yep.
But they're usually not paying themselves or their co-founders while they're going through this process. They're working for pure sweat equity, which may or may not be worth anything. They might take in a pre-seed round, which is anything like, say, 500 or 600,000 from angels, family and friends, angel syndicates, accelerators, et cetera. That might be able to get them some development, right?
Yeah.
Usually that startup hopefully has a CTO that can do a lot of the work himself, but they might get some developers or external third-party, people to help on the back end with regard to streamlining that process. But they're not paying people much, and they're probably paying them. Classifying them illegally as independent contractors, that's probably not right, especially in California, and paying them maybe flat fees or by, hourly. And then, they're waiting for like that real, I would say, 3 to 5 million injection of, and it could be a safe. There are clients of ours who have, 4 million on a safe or 5 million on a safe. But usually it's a price round once it hits the 2 to 3 million mark. We start to consider how much we want to keep on safes at that point. So whether it's a safe or a series seed, that's when we see the expansion, right? And that's when we see them actually hire an issue from the option pool, which has been usually previously untouched, right? We might set aside a 10% allocation of the authorized shares for an option pool at the inception of the company, but it won't be tapped until after that money comes in. And when they're really starting to like actually hire people on like a full-time basis with benefits, running proper payroll, getting 409A valuations, issuing those options, really being more mindful about buttoning things up now that they are institutionalized in some ways. But until then, they're kind of, they're taking calculated, I would call it, they were taking calculated risks.
And it's being scrappy and mean and yeah.
And I think as a lawyer, in this space, especially when you're practicing early stage, like the inclination can be like, well, that's illegal, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. But there has to be some level of like, well, if that costs X to do it from a legal perspective, to do it 100% compliant. But that would absolutely tank the company, and there is no company. Then, well, what is the risk we're willing to take, right? And I think lawyers who do that really well and who are able to balance the risk of, not complying with the cost of compliance are really resonate with early stage founders.
For your firm, like when are you typically getting involved with early stage founders? When do you sort of feel that they want to be engaging someone? And then what are the things that you're really helping them navigate through as they go through that sort of initial funding round, and then as they navigate through to a seed and then eventually Series A?
And I'll speak generally big law or small law, right? Because a lot of our, like 90% of our staff came from big law. So like we actually know how big law works pretty well. And by big law, I mean like firms that go over 1,000 people generally. They usually operate internationally. They're all the big names you would have heard of. Just understanding like where the hourly rates come in with law firms does make a difference with startup, because there is a point, especially with all the great AI options out there, where a company may form online and reach out to law firms, whether it's big law or small law, after they've done some DIY help options, which are generally, and some lawyers will very much disagree with me, but I think they're pretty good. Usually maybe after they raise some family and friends, so let's say they've taken like, a few checks from mom and dad and aunt and uncle, and they're all accredited. And they have some money in the bank, and they're just starting to do things where they're like, now there's some risk, right? They've already learned how to fill out a Y Combinator post-money safe note. Everyone knows how to do that. There's tons of tutorials online on that. They've availed themselves of all the self-help options, but now they're entering into their first customer contracts. And they pull the form, and usually this happens, they pull the form off YC or online or something, but they don't understand it. And they're not really comfortable with it because the IP of the company for a technology company, is too big to risk, right? And that's usually what ends up having them like land in a lawyer's desk. The other option, which I think, should be talked about, is a lot of accelerators have partnerships with bigger law firms where they might give you what's called deferred fees. And it could be like a $60,000 leash where you do have to pay it eventually. So do. But at the end of the leash, the fees become due and you have to pay monthly after that, right? And in theory, hopefully that will have given you some time to become something, to raise something.
Yeah.
And whether or not they really do run collections on you is a whole different thing. But in theory, you be honorable, you pay the fees at the end. And that's kind of the second point when we see a lot of companies come to small law firms. It's when, they needed the deferred fees at the get-go. They couldn't have paid up front at the get-go, but now they have some funding and maybe they've been working with the big law firm for 6 months and $1,200 an hour is a little bit too much for a seed stage company. And then they'll come to us. And vice versa. There are some times when we send people to big law as well. And the choices are like, if you don't have money to finance up front, usually small law is not going to be the right fit for you because they're going to bill you monthly. They might take a retainer. We take a retainer. And so, maybe you do need a big law option that's going to give you a fee deferral for up to, 6 months or until you raise money. And maybe that is the best, most economical option. So I think there's a space for everyone to play in the pond. I think there's so much business here in Silicon Valley. I think I just gave you the stat of like $60 billion, right? 60% to early stage. There's so much business. It's really, and there's such great lawyers in San Francisco at big firms and small firms alike. It's really hard in the competitiveness of Silicon Valley and San Francisco to be a really bad lawyer and do really well, right? So it really becomes a client choice as to like when the risk becomes enough that it's the online options are just not cutting it and you've hopefully exhausted that, as much as you can. And then when and how you want to pay for legal services, because legal services certainly aren't cheap. Even at small law firms, they are something. And so choosing that wisely and using that at the point where you think the risk of doing it wrong exceeds the reward of saving a few dollars, right? Like that's when I think legal can be really effectively used.
Yeah.
We normally see founders raise what we would call a pre-seed. So let's say 500, 600,000 and less, and they might go to a seed, which is about, let's say $1 million, $2 million. And now they've got about, let's say 2.6 on safe note instruments, right? And the question becomes, all right, do we do seed 2, which could be a safe note round, which is pretty much the most predominant convertible. It's the Y Combinator post-money valuation cap, only a safe. That's the one that everyone's using these days. Every once in a while, there's a discount of 20%. That's that other template, but most of them are using that post-money valuation cap safe. And it's when they get to that amount of money that's already on safes and they see how that converts, right? At the next price round, presuming that they can guesstimate, I'll say, their conversion, at the time of their conversion, what their post-money valuation will be, and the next round that they're going to raise based on what they need, right? And that dilution is going to be, less than or more than they want, right? But we normally would see founders at the 2 to 3 million mark start to say, hey, should I go for a price? And that usually means a series seed or a series A, right? And one of the considerations that I don't think gets brought up enough from a very practical perspective is cost of time, right? So a safe note, it's so easy. I don't want to be like, it's so easy, a monkey can do it, but like there's so many things that make a price round complicated and take a long time, right? You have usually like myself representing the company, lead counsel at a big law firm, maybe a noisy second with lead counsel at another big law firm. We're going back and forth over emails about terms. We're talking to you a lot, almost on a daily basis. And this can take a month, 2 months. Your money's not in the door. You're spending money on legal. And by the way, you're also paying for your lead investors counsel as well. And so that's usually, there's a cap. It could be 30, it could be 50. It's, depending on what level of cleanup there is as well, could also make a difference. But so you're paying your own lawyer's fees, you're paying their fees, they're all coming due. Usually at that point, we might talk about, deferring some fees till the close, but it's still going to become something. And you're not getting money in the door right away. Versus a safe note, you're issuing them on platforms and people are electronically signing them and wiring you funds. And it's very quick. It's very easy. Aside from a possible side letter that's attached to the safe note where you might need some legal help, it's a pretty easy founder instrument. They just fill in the name, the amount, the post-money valuation cap, and make sure the signature blocks look right, and they get money immediately. Now, that's just not the way with the price round. So what I think is really interesting is when founders actually take the time to say, okay, I'm raising 4.5 million all on convertible instruments like a safe, or maybe a combination of safe and convertible notes, although convertible notes are fewer and farther in between these days, except for certain industries like biotech or hardware type companies. But they make the calculated decision to go safe round and basically take a haircut on dilution to speed up the money.
Yeah.
And that's usually in those instances when our clients make that calculated risk, assessment. They've run the pro forma. They know they're going to come up above the 20% dilution that you would normally see at seed when that thing converts.
Yeah.
They understand it. They know they're going to be diluted more, but they need the money right now.
Yeah.
And they need it because if they don't get that money in the next, and like usually it's like weeks, like 2 weeks, it's a done deal. Like the company is not going to operate. It cannot pay for even the systems that run it every day. And so that, I think in this economy where companies might have raised in 2021, 2022, and now it's 2025.
Yeah.
And a bridge round has passed. We don't have, any other funding on the horizon that it puts companies in that very tight squeeze where they have to make quick decisions that are based on cost and timing, right?
Yeah.
And we have seen some of our clients just say, hey, we're going to take the haircut on the equity for the speed and cost effectiveness of a safe round.
Yeah.
We understand that it's going to be a problem. Yeah. We're not going to like it. Yeah. I've run the pro forma. Yeah. You've run the pro forma with us. We're all full disclosure. And, we go ahead and we do it.
Yeah.
But in a healthier economy where deployment at the early stage is up, you would see both VCs and founders, and money is not as far and few between. Like we have it stretched between 2.5 years between rounds. We're going the normal, 18, 24 months between rounds. We're not above our metrics, right?
So thinking about cost is obviously a consideration, complexity, but the time to actually get the money and complete the deal is really important. And one of the things we've experienced ourselves at Cake on our funding journey is like even if, you can get a yes from an investor, but by the time you actually close out the round and get the time to get the money in the door, that can be quite a long time, right? So it's like, even if that goes through that deal, you just need to be realistic and allow enough time for all those sort of things.
Yeah. Time kills all deals. And if ARR is being used as benchmark for how much you might want to raise in this round, and your customers are big tech or big co, and they have termination for convenience provisions in your commercial contracts, then, the longer you wait, the more there's a chance of something going wrong with a big time customer and you losing that huge revenue that you were using to base the amount of your raise, right? And so, time kills all deals. And I think there are some practical considerations to be had and to be thought of during this process. I don't think we can always just say, okay, at this, blanket number of 2 to 3 million, now we switch over to a series seed. I don't think it's as cut and dry as that anymore in light of the nuance of like the past, 4 years of lack of like a really robust seed economy.
Yeah. Okay. So, I hear a couple of messages from you there, safer are easier, quicker to get funding in the door. If you're at the similar stage where you could actually do a priced round, then potentially there is more dilution involved in it. So you may be taking money like convenience. What are some of the other things they need to look out for? I think particularly in the current environment, you often see bridging rounds and maybe even multiple rounds of safes. Do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Sure. I mean, aside from like the sheer amount of money you have on safes before your priced round, which you always have to track as a founder, right? It's the post-money valuation cap. What's amazing to me is that there are so many stats all over the place around where you can see as a startup founder what peers, maybe not in your very specific sub-vertical, but your vertical, you can see what post-money valuation caps they're using given the size of their total raise, right? And you would be amazed how many times founders will come to us as lawyers and be like, is that right? And it's far below what the market is. Yeah. And we always say, you're not a stat. We're not saying anyone is stat, but you should know what the stats are so that if you're undercutting yourself, if you know that you're offering too low of a post-money valuation cap in light of the size of your round, and you're giving your investors, your angel investors, quite a windfall, right? And those post-money valuation cap safes, they don't convert against each other anymore at this level. At the investor level, they push down on the common. So you want to make sure that you're setting your post-money valuation cap appropriately. And that is going to be stage specific, vertical specific. So obviously AI companies are going to get away with a higher post-money valuation cap because generally speaking, their post-money valuations are higher at the time of conversion, right? Or at least they are this year. And then of course, like biotech or life sciences or certain hardware robotics, they're going to have different caps than a general SaaS company, right? So knowing where you are fitting in the broader market, aside from just I talked with a guy who did this a few years ago, is something that we tell our founders, like spend some time researching. It's not just funny money.
Yeah.
at some point setting a too low post-money valuation cap is actually very, very harmful in terms of how this all works out for you at the price round.
Yeah.
So that's one. I think the other caveat that we have been seeing is, well, a lot of companies have done, like going to your point about bridge rounds, they've done, let's say, a series seed, but now they're 2.5 years out from series seed and they can't raise a series A. They're not quite there yet in terms of what milestones they need to meet in order to justify raising a series A. They're not there yet where they want to be. So they raise a bridge round, which can be on a combination of convertible notes or safes, usually safes in the West Coast. And they're coming with really robust side letters at this point in the game. And it's to be expected. It's economy for their existing leads to be picky and careful, right? About who they're going to continue to fund, especially when the fail rate between seed and A is so significant. Choosing which seeds we're going to bridge as a VC, I think, is very important. And what kind of terms we're getting or asking a client to give up at this point might also be important. So we have seen some bridges come in with requests to remove certain provisions that have always been historically important for founders. And it's usually a side letter term that it comes in. And I would say it's not insignificant, but I won't say that it's only limited to bridge.
Right.
We have seen that on other due diligence requests. For example, we were helping a client raise a round, and this has come up more than once, so we know it's out there, where some big name accelerators and their venture counsel, so these accelerators have funds, have asked founders to remove double trigger acceleration, which is entirely helpful for them. If you as a founder are acquired and laid off due no fault of your own just because they have a CEO that can operate that product, in theory, what thing we would put in there to protect you is double trigger acceleration, so that when you're acquired and let go, no fault of your own again, all of your shares accelerate and they're all vested and you walk home with the whole kit and caboodle because you did such a good job, but they don't need you and that's not your problem. And unfortunately, if we take that away, then you go home with, let's say you vested only 1/4 of your total shares, you go home with only that amount, right? The other thing we're seeing that I think is timely and a reaction to the amount of secondaries that we've seen in the past few years that both affects founders, but also the ability to hire really top tier talent is we have seen some VCs, smart ones too, ask for blanket restrictions on common stock transfer, which reduce the amount of secondaries with a carve out for, which is very smart and very self-interested, but a carve out for the investors' preferred shares that might have converted to common, right? So that founders, like let's say you raise your Series B and you have all this common stock that's fully vested and you just want to buy a house, buy a car, or fund your kids' college. And now you really can't do that secondary transaction to like get rid of those vested shares. And I do think this is a reaction to the pure amount of secondaries. The secondary market was insane these past years because no one was able to exit. So someone needed liquidity and all of their money was tied up in shares. And so that restriction now, if it's on a go forward basis, is going to hamstring founders in terms of their options to get liquid. But it's also going to affect hiring.
So you were talking a little bit about the employees' perspective there. So it'd be great to now sort of pivot over to that side. And then what about the stock incentive plans? When you typically see those being set up, what are some of the things that founders need to be really thinking about as they go through that process? You mentioned earlier that, the initial pool will typically be set up quite early, but they may not be allocating now out. So can you just talk us through that?
Yeah. So normally, and this is kind of common sense advice, but we'll authorize 10 million common shares when you form. And then maybe we'll put a 10% or 20% option pool. Our firm tends to do like 10% in an option pool. So 1 million stock option pool. We put 1 million, what I call on ice in the fridge. So that these are shares that are outside of the stock plan. That the board can determine in good faith what the fair market value is, but you certainly don't get 409As to issue those. And then we have about the remainder of 8 million, which we usually divide across the founding team in some proportion. So if you own 4 million of the 8 million, you own 50% of your company because 4 divided by 8, which is the total issued number, is 50%, right? But usually at the inception, we do set it up. Now, the reason why a lot of founders don't issue from it is the cost of 409As. Because in the pre-seed and seed, they didn't raise that much money. They have usually a good CFO on staff by the time they raise some money. they can kind of guesstimate in good faith what the fair market value of the restricted stock outside of the plan and that other 1 million bucket. Because we have 2 million on reserve, one in a plan and one out.
Yeah.
They can kind of guesstimate it. Maybe like they raise $200,000 and get some beta trials out. Maybe it's a 3 times value, right? To not 0.0001 to 0.0003 or whatever. Like they have some reasonable basis. They can talk with their CFO about it and kind of come up with an idea that feels about right. And that's usually what they do to save on that 409A cost, right? Because the 409A is something that most of our clients get usually after like taking in some money, and not like hundreds of thousands, but like millions. So like at 4 or 5 million on a safe or a series seed, we would say, hey, like talk with your CFO. And if you think it's worth getting a 409A, because you guys can't in good faith guesstimate it, you've got all this revenue coming in, and we just raised $4.5 million. You're hiring all these people. You're developing the IP portfolio. It's starting to get a little bit more hairy than just $200,000 in the bank, right? And the CFO might say, hey, it's time to get a 409A to start that process. But that is a cost, and it's a cost that will be incurred every 12 months. There is a safe harbor. So absent a material change in financial circumstances like another raise, that's a pretty good financial, like a report that you can use to set your strike price in the options. And then from there, they might issue independent contractors NSOs, and then employees either NSOs or ISOs is most common. There's some concerns about early exercise or not early exercise. There are some very special deals that we're seeing being cut right now.
So can you talk to that a little bit?
Everyone says early exercise, option grants, like you remove the skin in the game because you want that person there for 4 years, right? You want them to have that. I have seen some very smart C-level staff coming into our companies that are on our docket, negotiating really extensively on the options, early exercise, what kinds based on their tax counsel's advice, even around exits and payment of taxes for certain types of exits and when they happen, right? And that offer letter is no longer just a 7-page template with special termination provisions for executive staff, right? It's a really robust, like 10-page, 13-page offer letter. And it's usually like when you see that level of diligence by the potential COO or CTO, they usually have great counsel with them. They usually are a founder who has already exited another company and knows the tax implications that happen at exit. They're negotiating it up front right now. And I think it's really smart. I think can it feel like overkill for the CEO who this is his first company and he's hiring the CTO guy and all of a sudden there's a 13-page offer letter? It can absolutely feel that way. But it doesn't take away from the fact that they're thinking about these things very strategically.
You mentioned exercise there a few times. Like, can you mind just drilling down to clarify, like, what are the vesting provisions that are going with that and versus exercise? And the
TLDR is that in the West Coast and in the States, historically, it's been what we would call a 4-1, right? So you have a 1-year cliff. So you start working on this date. That's your vesting commencement date. And then you have 1 year, and then your shares vest a quarter of those shares. Say 100,000 shares you got. 25% or 25,000 will vest immediately on that 1-year anniversary. And then they'll vest, monthly or quarterly for the next 3 years, right? It's a total of 4 years. There has been some really interesting thought leadership on whether or not to extend that. For some types of companies.
Are you talking top-ups there, post that 4-year period?
Extending the vesting schedule entirely. And some blogs that I've read with by some VCs in terms of like looking at the time frame between rounds or with certain industries where it just takes a lot more to get to market. Look at life sciences or biotech. It's, you're not going to just work there for 4 years and it gets funded, right? Like it can be a longer life cycle than a general SaaS. And so there are some thought leadership coming out about whether or not a 4-1 is really what we should be telling everyone to do, right? In light of the current economy, in light of the differentiation between different types of companies and different verticals, and the financing opportunities for those verticals, right? And in terms of like, what I have alternatives that I have seen that extended to like 5-1. I haven't seen anything longer than 5. We do know that when you do raise a price round, if you are then almost fully vested, your VC, if it's a smart VC, will ask you to 3-jig it up, right? Like maybe you take a haircut on the last 3 years and you start again. like, it's a 3-year shakeup.
Yeah.
And you might have to do that, right?
Yeah.
But it is a way to keep you incentivized. So let's say that those are options. And if you have the ability to early exercise and exercise your options before they vest,
Yeah.
you normally exercise as they vest, right? Then you really don't have as much skin in the game to stay long term.
Yeah.
That being said, I understand that certain very sophisticated C-level or VP level hires that our clients are hiring may ask for it and get it. And it's literally because they are going to be the CTO that this company needs. He was recommended by that VC that funded them, and he knows what his worth is. So, I won't say that it's not uncommon in this economy that it's always so precarious to move to an early stage company for very smart C-level staff to ask for more. Because they're leaving their big job at Apple or Google or Microsoft to do this, and funding is down 12 and 6% for seed and Series A. So why not ask for, tax benefits or more shares, but not even just more, but having a vesting schedule that's truncated, or asking for special termination provisions that require a lot of notice. Like, why not ask for that? It's the market.
So as a founder, I think the key message here is just like, for very top talent, you may need to be flexible.
Correct.
Just be really aware of the trade-offs you're making and what that potentially means in terms of the different scenarios.
Yeah. And I think I had a conversation with, a couple of my founders about this recently, which is like, it's kind of like negotiating a prenup, right?
Yeah.
Like, how robustly do you want to negotiate this at the front end?
Yeah.
Will it sour the working relationship going forward
Yeah.
when you may never terminate this debt, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're negotiating this, 7A through D paragraph on termination when divorce may never happen, right? And so there is some level of EQ here that has to be considered, because it is not the startup founders market. It's the investors market. It's the guy that you really need to bring over to help develop your product because your VC said, this is the guy. It's his market. It's not yours, right? And so as a result, like, yes, the terms might be onerous on the investment side. It might be onerous when you're bringing on that great, amazing CTO. But like, how far do you want to push it? Like, is that the hill? I think I say this a lot with my clients. Is that the hill you want to die on, right? Like, or can we just choose one or two things, and then the rest let them be, right? And I think that's something to consider, like, personally for each founder, because it's such a personal question. And I think there's some ego in there. I think there's some intangible. There's EQ. There's ego. It's not just about when we're seeing these executive comp negotiations. It's not just about money or shares. It's because there's a little bit of power strung in there too.
You mentioned the 409As. One of the things you mentioned earlier on when we're talking about getting to like your seed round is you mentioned cleanup. We also talked about the trade-off when you're really early on. You can't dot every I and cross every T because if it costs that much where you're going out of business, that's not practical. What are some of the things that are really important and maybe even some examples of where you've seen some big mistakes by founders in managing their cap table?
Some of our clients who came to us for cleanup, where they've done like 8 years of no lawyer, or maybe they had a big firm lawyer, but the guy was too expensive, so they never called him.
Right.
And unfortunately, they issued a bunch of equity. At guesstimations. But shoot, they issued it from the stock plan. And they're an 8-year-old company with contracts, but they didn't realize they had to get a 409A. Oh my gosh. Right? Like, or there's no board consent to back up all these grants. Now we have to ratify 8 years worth of grants, right? Or what's very common, especially with founders who are not in Silicon Valley, is they price their own round. So like their mom and dad gives them like $50,000 and they're like, I'm going to give you this much shares, right? And they create this valuation concern where now we've sold shares for dollars as opposed to getting them on a safe note. We set up kind of set a valuation in a way, right? And so sometimes at that point they'll be like, oh shoot, I gave my mom and dad, shares for dollars, but they only gave me $50,000 and I only raised $100,000. I should have done it via safe. How do we unwind that, right? What are the tax implications of doing that? Can we buy it back from them at a slightly higher price and then issue them a safe? They're like, what do we do? What do we do about this? And that is I think the most interesting part of the lawyer job. I think there's a lot of lawyer tasks, and I'm going to say this because I know there's a lot of AI founders who are like, let's find a way to take your job, Lindsey. And I'm telling you, I think there's a spot for it.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of repetitive tasks in law, a lot of form filling, a lot of paper pushing that have historically been done by paralegal staff or junior associates that can be automated.
Yeah.
I think corporate cleanup cannot. And if it can, I think it would make my life so much easier. Someone make it out there. But
Well, I mean, that's part of the reason why we exist. I mean, and things like, you're making it easy to get your 409A. It's all part of, a lot of the information's in the platform already. It's just passing it over. But even things like, your board consents, it's built into the process of you actually issuing an equity grant.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have to think about doing that separately. It's actually built into the process, right? And so
it should be. And it should trigger them. If you don't want to elect it, then you have to upload your own consent. And you're like, oh, I have to do that, right? And I tell my early stage clients, we're a law firm that actually will defer a lot to technology like yours, because we're like, listen, we're $6.50 an hour.
Yeah.
Do you want to take the risk that board sim that you pulled somewhere from your platform is wrong or right, or to pay us to do it when we know this is a pretty standard form document? And most of our clients will be like, oh, if they offer it on cake or whatever, I'll just use it. And we're like, sure, do it.
Yeah.
And I think that legal technology is so good that you can, as a founder, be triggered to be like, oh, it's something I either ask my lawyer about, or I click this button and the form generates for me. And then it's just a matter of risk tolerance. Like, are you the founder that can do well on your own and sign things and follow instructions? Or are you the founder who's like, I just don't know. I would feel much more comfortable if my lawyer is signing off on it. And we're here for both, right? Like that's the goal of good lawyering, is to figure out where you are on that risk tolerance scale and where you are on the competency to get things done scale. And have you use your online options accordingly to what fits best, like how well you as a person follow instructions and can execute things that are foreign to you. Versus always need to pay a lawyer to double check something, like where your comfort level is and your competence is on those two things.
And I think that's it. That's very much our mindset. It's like, let's build a platform that automates a lot of the grunt work, streamlines as much as it can, but also have a great network of partners like yourself who can actually provide the advice and the value add where it's really required. So that's.
And I think small law firms are really well positioned to use legal tech because we don't have big, large legal secretary or paralegal departments that bring in a lot of revenue for us. We can see the writing on the wall that that's where a lot of the automated options are going. And I think if law firms can embrace it, we have both a cost savings, benefit and a slightly ethical dilemma. Ethical dilemma being, if no one hires first-year law students out of law school, then how do we train the next generation, right?
On the governance and hygiene factors, it's like, why is that important? Well, as you progress through different funding rounds, the requirements, the level of due diligence you have from new investors coming onto your cap table increases. Once you get past Series B, you've got audit requirements that are actually going to be part of the process there as well. And then ultimately, when you come to an exit scenario, like every little thing that you actually have that hasn't been an I dotted or a T crossed is going to be a negotiating factor for the other side, for them to be able to reduce down whatever the terms of the deal, the pricing of the deal, etc. So you want to get these things right. You don't have to be 100% perfect right from day one, but you do need to get your house in order as you go through that journey.
We're finding people being asked to get their house in order a lot earlier now because of the funding environment being down for early stage or seed and A. That even in 2021, we had a company that got a term sheet. He was a repeat founder, so bear with me. But term sheet, no company even formed, just an idea, right? Now we have companies with revenue who have formed correctly, whose investors are taking their sweet time doing due diligence. And they're expecting much more, right? So when they log into the platform, if you want to speed up the deal, what we do is we're making sure that like the board consents, the stock agreements, the 83D elections, all of these things are uploaded properly or attached to wherever they need to be, either in the VDR or directly to on the cap table. So that investors counsel can log into the VDR or whatever and just see the documents right there, right? All the signed CIIs or PIIAs, all the signed stock grants, all the board consents that backs up every single grant. And that level, I think, of really honing in on that in a way that's pretty significant at the early stage, I think is something that we're seeing because of the economy.
Yeah.
Because investors can be picky.
Yeah.
So why not make sure that every single person who touched the company absolutely signed a CIA or PIIA, which by the way, you should do. Making sure all that IP is properly assigned. Why not make sure that if you had a co-founder before, you had a separation agreement with a waiver of claims? Why not make sure that all stock grants have a board consent before we give the money over to that startup, right?
Yep.
So I do think that, yes, it definitely matters after a price round. It definitely matters as you exit, whether it's a entity sale, asset sale, or an IPO, which there were 12 last quarter, so not that many, but it does matter then, but it does matter even earlier than before. So I encourage all of our founders to start with online platform cap tables from the get-go, to train them to do that there. Because when we have had founders use paper stock certificates before, the messiness that results in terms of like tying out a cap table at the raise has been so terrible that if we train you from the get-go to always use the online platform to issue stock and to get board consensus, then usually by the time we hit that raise, there's more of a record that's been built for opposing counsel. Usually at a big law firms, great law firms who will pour through all of your platform to make sure that all the relevant documents are in place.
Great.
Yeah, we want to make it as easy as possible today.
Are there, a couple of key things that you'd say, like, here are really common mistakes that you want to avoid as a founder in that sort of, that pre-seed to seed stage, moving up to Series A, either on the funding side or just generally how you're managing your overall cap table?
Well, I think I talked about some of them. Was if you are going for VC financing, making sure you're watching how much money you take on safes before your price round, making sure that your post-money valuation cap, if you're using that template, is appropriately set for your vertical and your stage and the amount that you're raising. So that's obviously number one.
Yep.
Number two, which never gets talked about as much, which is like, is this company even the right fit for venture capital?
Yeah.
In the Bay Area, everyone wants to be a VC funded company. They'll walk into our door and tell us why they have to be venture funded or they should be venture funded. And I do think, there's in places like Silicon Valley where that's the badge of honor. Sometimes founders don't go through the actual diligence of understanding like, well, am I just a small business? Because there are tons of profitable small businesses out there. And that maybe just needs some angel financing from mom and dad and a few friends, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll never go for VC financing, or am I the company that wants to get VC financing? And that's a come to Jesus that everyone has to understand. But more often than not, because of the graduation rate from safe notes to a priced round, it's a very steep fail rate. So there's a number of companies that find out 2 or 3 years later that they're not the right fit in their venture capital because they've had conversations with VCs and their exit plans or the market size is just not really there for the VC to invest. And that's a consistent advice across various VCs. And if only they had just done that diligence before, that could have changed the entire trajectory of their company, right? So like understanding that, I think at the get-go is important because if you are going to be a small business, maybe you're going to be an S Corp or an LLC and you don't need qualified small business stock because you'll never sell and you'll just operate this as a family business. Maybe the Delaware C Corp model with the venture funding bells and whistles that SSM would set you up with is not the right play, right? We are a venture capital law firm. We assume that everyone who comes to us wants that. But a lot of them find out they don't. And so I would say that that's one thing. We have female founders who are saying, I want to be female founded. I'm not going to take on a male co-founder.
Yeah.
So we have other female founders who are looking for CTOs who generally might be more often male than female, and understanding that market and playing within the confines of what they understand the biases are. And I think in a time like this, it's not just that no one's getting money. Like funding is down for seed and Series A, 6 and 12, of course, but it really does impact female-founded companies. So the all female-founded, and I think we have some very hard decisions to make with no right answers and very personal decisions about how to onboard future co-founders, especially for our female founders in the group. So I'm hopeful that, once the economy picks up again, those numbers are going to increase because they used to be at like 1.9 or 2%.
Yeah. Right?
That was historical. I've seen everything like 1.7, 2% of all venture funding goes to all female founded teams.
Any insights on what's driving that?
I think it's the amount of funding at the early stage is just generally down.
Yep.
And that really impacts a certain subset of founders who never really got the funding to begin with.
And maybe is a first-time founder or whatever.
It could be, maybe may even not be.
Yeah.
There's bias in every industry. There's Silicon Valley funding is not immune to,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So whenever you see a funding drop like that at the early stage, and that number previously at 1.7 to 2% was already small for all female founded teams, then you're going to see that drop even more.
Yeah.
And I think there are some really hard decisions. I've had a lot of conversations with female founders who are clients about the two different options I presented, right? Some have taken one way and some have taken the other. There's no judgment either way. It's whatever you want to do. But it's a hard decision to make, and it's a very personal one. And there's no easy answer or like directive you can give as a lawyer, but it is something that I think as a female founded law firm that we're very uniquely positioned to advise on and very interested in understanding because it is a problem. I believe in the industry still, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lindsey. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.